Welcome to another edition of WVD Monthly, presented by XenTegra, with your host Andy Whiteside and Pete Downing, your source for all things Azure and Microsoft WVD.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of WVD Monthly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside, and of course, I got with me Pete Downing, the CMTO of XenTegra and an avid WVD fanboy. What's going on, Pete?
What's going on, Andy? How's everything going?
Well, it's my third podcast today and probably fourth of the week. So been busy, plus trying to run a company and have a family and do a little consulting and not much. What's going on?
Yeah, I hear that, man.
I know you've been frantically working on the XenTegra website and this Bronco giveaway that we're doing. Anything else that's high priority in your world?
Just like you, I'm spread across all the different facets of the business, and helping where I can. I mean, that's the best part about being on the team is tap into the skill sets that we're good at, and we help our customers be successful. So.
Yeah, that's certainly the idea. And you know what? We have been successful, and we've got a lot of happy customers and a lot of people that are, happy with what we do, even the ones that aren't our customers that get value out of podcasts and webinars and workshops and things that we do. So it's great. I mean, it's definitely rewarding. It keeps us busy, though.
Oh, yeah, it does.
So this is episode 2. Episode 1 was just the introduction into the podcast. And in episode 2, we've got a little bit of work to do here. We've got to cover June, July, and August announcements, and we probably won't go super deep on those. There's been a lot of big stuff between June, July, and August. So I think what we're going to do here is we're just going to walk through the months and let you highlight the big pieces of each. And then when we get to episode 3, it'll be September information, and we'll dive deeper into everything that happened in September as far as Microsoft's announcements as it relates to the What's New blog for WVD.
Yeah, definitely. And it's been a fun ride. I mean, I gotta say, XenTegra's been playing with WVD for well over, I'll say since beginning of last year. I remember you and I were on a meeting with one of the product managers back. It was the end of 2018, believe it or not, if you can believe that. And then we got plugged into the beta pretty early. So we've been around this for a long time, and so we've seen this thing kind of evolve, and it's been very interesting to watch it, per se. But I think the biggest change in July was,
starting in June.
The biggest change in June is WVD went from being a non-ARM based service to an ARM based service. So what does that mean? That means that you don't have to search in the marketplace to get the WVD provisioning tool. You can now go in and add it as a service within your resource manager, which is really cool because it essentially puts WVD as a quote unquote first class citizen. So things like being able to manage host pools, workspaces, and app groups is all now done within the resource manager. So it's a first class citizen is what it comes down to. And what makes it better for, the traditional administrators, now you can fully take advantage of role-based administration, and it also gets twined into the native PowerShell commandlets that are provided by Azure as well. So all in all, it really put WVD front and center into Azure and the Azure Resource Manager. And so a lot of administrators were very happy with the overall integration of WVD into the ARM-based service.
I have to assume it gave people a lot of confidence too, right? When you see it show up as the part of the system and not something you bolt onto it, that it's something that's for real and will continue to evolve as part of the bigger picture.
Yeah, and I mean, is it perfect? No. And as an ex-product manager, it's a good, solid, what I call minimal viable product to keep WVD relevant, right? And so, I think Microsoft is going to continue to evolve the offering, and we've seen it firsthand. So I'm very, very impressed with what I've seen come out of Microsoft over the last, say 6 to 8 months.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we talked a lot about in the intro about where Microsoft's at. They know they got a lot of work to do, but they also seem pretty committed this time around to at least covering most of the feature gaps compared to a Citrix or a VMware, at least over time.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, right? So if we jump into July, right, you start seeing some of that being put to motion. So things like, the Teams update, right? As an example, Microsoft is very committed to obviously making Microsoft Teams work the best with their platform, but I think you'll see them hopefully evolve into other collaboration tools like Zoom and GoToMeeting, et cetera. You and I both know we live on, Ring Central every day. And without it, we wouldn't have been able to function in this pandemic, as an example. So, the Teams update was very critical, and it really puts Teams, again, as a first-class citizen with the WVD offering, and makes the audio and video, as optimized as possible. Now, is it going to be just like Citrix and VMware? No, but it's good enough if you're a smaller, SMB shop, or you've never used, VMware or Citrix in the past.
Yeah, I want to be clear on this. Everything we talk about here are just basic underlying things that might be good enough or might go a long way towards being part of a bigger solution with one of the other providers that leverage, this baseline technology.
Yeah, and that's what's really cool about this offering is it has a great panel, or what they call the lighthouse partners, right? There's a lot of partners in the ecosystem that enhance the WVD offering, and believe it or not for a huge amount of money, right? So it's an add-on cost, yes, but if you look at cost per desktop or cost per user per month, it's still within reach for a lot of organizations if you want to get that optimal experience. So I'm I'm very impressed with the partners within the ecosystem. But another area that's
just to stay on the Teams thing real quick. I grew up in a world of open systems. I say Microsoft, and Microsoft is part of those. They worked with a lot of different applications, right? You could install whatever good or bad you wanted to on a desktop all these years, and then you have like open systems like Linux that came along that allowed it to be even more flexible, maybe not as intuitive, but more flexible. Teams being a Microsoft product, Microsoft Office in general being a Microsoft product, and then Microsoft having the desktop, the UI there. It's going to be interesting. I think Apple proved to me personally, I think to the industry, that a little bit of a closed system where you at least own a bunch of stuff, your own stuff end to end, allows you to make it all work. And I think that's kind of where we're at with Microsoft WVD plus Office plus Teams plus other things that Microsoft has. They can control their own destiny there. And yes, they seem open to working with other third parties, but at the same time, they control the source code to multiple things simultaneously that might just make that stuff work the best.
Yeah, I agree with that. So July was also an interesting month because, we heard about the spring release, right? And Microsoft came out and officially said, hey, the spring release is officially released. They said the fall, what they would call the fall release, is now going to be called Windows Virtual Desktop Classic, while the spring release is now just going to be called Windows Virtual Desktop. So again, the big difference between the two is non-ARM versus ARM. And if you're going to be rolling out WVD, you're probably going to be using the Windows Virtual Desktop, not Classic. So I would recommend, if you're net new to WVD, stick with Windows Virtual Desktop and don't try to do Classic. But one of the big things that I think came out of this is, the client, right? So the client is consistently evolving. Is it perfect? No. Does it have parity with some of their partners in the ecosystem like Citrix and VMware? No. But they continue to enhance like the Android client, the iOS client, the Mac client, et cetera. So, an example of that is they updated the remote desktop for Android. So, that just shows that Microsoft is committed to continuously updating the client. We'll see another update in the next month in August as well, in the client arena as well. So, and the big thing that I always get asked in it is, hey, can I use my RDP client that's on Windows to connect to WVD? And the simple answer is no. You have to use the remote desktop client that works with WVD, and it's not actually it doesn't have parity even with the local client on your Windows 10 device, as an example.
And why is that? I've wondered that myself. What's Is there something special about the WVD remote desktop client?
I've always wondered that too, and I've asked that, and I can't get a straight answer, to be honest with you. And my understanding is they had to go back and kind of re-architect how they connect to the different brokering services, and then the reverse proxy concept as well, or what's called reverse connect, so that you don't have to poke holes through the firewall. So I think it had something to do with that, and it just made it easier to architect it to go back a few versions and then fill in the gaps with UDP as well. So that, the client continues to get improved, which is pretty cool.
That's a good opportunity to have this conversation, to have all the time with people. And that is, you look at the world of Citrix, people always talked about the back end. The back end is really, really important, but it's an asynchronous solution, right? That endpoint and the client that runs on the endpoint and the processing power of the endpoint, that does matter. And a lot of people through the years have gotten caught up in the idea that it's a back-end only solution. There's a lot of magic and a lot of code and a lot of development capabilities in that client that should not be overlooked.
No, I agree. And Microsoft, like I said, is continuously updating the client. I mean, if you have it on your endpoint, you'll see it's updated at least monthly, if not more. And it's pretty seamless as well. So that's what they've made it pretty easy to maintain from a client perspective.
Yeah, I should check and see if it's on my endpoint I'm using right now. I haven't put it on there, so I'm sure it's not. I'm wondering how I'd go about putting it on there, but certainly something I should be, testing and doing some more with, just to validate the client side. And for those of you listening, I make that comment tongue-in-cheek because I'm using a Google Neverware Chrome-based, Linux-based operating system. That would be an interesting test if I were to stop and do it right now and see what was out there for me.
Yeah, that would be so. Cool. The other two big things that I would call out in July is, one, the diagnostics. I think diagnostics is very important to your hardcore administrators, right? They want to be able to troubleshoot issues as they arise. They want to know who's logged in and when, things like that. So Microsoft took it upon themselves to integrate diags into WVD, which makes it a lot easier to troubleshoot and understand the environment. Now, is it easy? No, but does it work? Yes. And there's a lot of great documentation out there, and there's a lot of great lighthouse partners out there. One in particular that I like is a company called Sapago, out of Germany. They have a great shim that goes on top of this to put a nice visualization tool on top of the diags. Now, do you have to pay for a partner? No, you can use the diags and do log analytics. You just have to know your way around the tool, but also remember that everything you do costs money. And I always jokingly say, everything you turn on in Azure costs you, even if it's pennies on the dollar, it still costs you money. So just remember that as you turn on diagnostics and start doing log analytics, that, yeah, you're getting a lot of great logs, but it's costing you some dollars and cents. So,
yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a balancing act between what it would cost to go out and build stuff in a data center, acquire hardware, power, cooling, versus just turning stuff on. It's easy. I'll give you a great example. My wife and daughter go to a discount place and buy all kinds of prom dresses and amazing clothes. Sometimes you wonder, did I even need that? And the fact that it's easy to buy and cheap, buy the drink. Sometimes you get caught up in that and not really understand the total cost of what you just did.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. So the auto scaling up tool update that they made as well is, it's great and it works. However, it's still, when you turn it on, you have to leverage some of the functionality under the covers with an Azure Logic app, and you have to make sure that the script that's in GitHub is tweaked to your use case. So there is some work involved to scale session hosts using Azure Automation, but again, it does cost pennies on the dollar, but it still costs you some dollars and cents when you use this tool. Now, another great partner in this arena that simplifies this a little bit is a company called Nerdio, which is one of my favorite plugins too. If you're just looking holistically, a nice provisioning plane on top of WVD, and you want to use WVD native, then they're a great tool, and they have an auto scale functionality built in, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? Microsoft, to their credit, seems to be very open with the idea they're going to build stuff and they're going to build platforms and let people make it better. And kind of that world of remote desktop that's been around for 20 years, that was kind of the model there. We'll give you something, and then if you want to make it better, take it to the next level, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So July was all in all, it was a good month, but it was basically coming out and saying, hey, we made the spring release official. And August is kind of where we started seeing some tweaks here and there. And I'm actually looking forward to seeing what's coming out in September, where we're at right now. So I can't wait for our next session. But a lot of interesting things here. I'll start at the bottom, working my way up, but we actually work with a couple of government customers. And so I've been in the throes of this, but the Windows Virtual Desktop US Gov portal is now in public preview. And so that's huge for the government sector. Basically what that means is if you're using GCC or GCC High with Office, you can now use Azure with your Office instance, which is really big in highly secured environments or government agencies who have to be on GCC or GCC High. So this preview was critical to a couple of our customers, and I personally have been involved with one, and I was excited to see this. Now, so it's going to be interesting to see how fast Microsoft can get parity with their commercial cloud to their gov cloud. And that's one of the big sticking points right now, is how much parity is there. So, and I got to say, they are moving pretty quick.
Well, I know that's huge for people in, state, federal, for sure. And even some of the state and local folks are looking for that piece.
Yeah. Yep.
What else? What else in all this?
So deployment templates are interesting. So, a lot of people love automation. And this goes back to your openness comment, right? If you go to the GitHub link that's there, it brings you to, some automation templates that are maintained and managed by Microsoft, which is pretty cool because, they own GitHub, which shows that they're fairly open. And two, they're always updating these automation templates, right? So they want to simplify our lives as administrators to deploy virtual machines. And so they provide these baseline templates. And, personally, I've worked with a couple of my customers to twine these into the auto scaling tools, et cetera. And so it just helps to have that baseline, because some of these to write from scratch are pretty involved. And so again, that I do like that Microsoft is very involved with the GitHub community and trying to provide examples wherever possible. I'd argue their documentation is pretty solid for WVD, and I personally am impressed. I mean, I've learned a lot personally just by reading documentation and saying, they do a very nice job at doing how-to, and this is a great example of that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I was interested, not necessarily the documentation piece, but the number of third-party ecosystem partners that immediately jumped on this because they believe that this is where a lot of it's going, and Microsoft's willingness to work with them. I know we mentioned that earlier, but I was shocked at the number of people that, they didn't quit working with all the other players here, but they definitely went running towards Microsoft when they saw the opportunity to what can be done here. Yeah, no, I agree.
So, and then the other area that's interesting too is PowerShell and Azure CLI. So, WVD is now a first-class citizen, not only in the CLI, but in the PowerShell commandlets as well. So if you do AZ WVD, there's a PowerShell, commands everywhere now built in, but then you can also use the Azure CLI for your automation tasks, et cetera. And that's what's called desktop virtualization. So AZ desktop virtualization, and you can pretty much do anything with the Azure CLI. Whereas before everything was secondary and off to the side, now it's nice and integrated, and you can do a lot more in regards to automation, logic, log analytics, et cetera. So it just shows that WVD is a first-class citizen now.
Yeah, you have to wonder if when Microsoft brought PowerShell, a true shell, forward way back when, they had this in mind, which maybe it's just coincidence that it really has worked out this way. But that the shell, the power of the shell, which was taught to me by a Unix administrator a long time ago, has never died, right? And a lot of people like to work in the shell, and certainly that's where you're going to script things to happen.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, when you learn either the Azure CLI or PowerShell for that matter, it makes life a lot easier when dealing with Azure in general, but also WVD. And I'm a big fan of it. So,
well, you probably still have on your list of things to do to put together an Azure WVD PowerShell class. I mean,
I'd love to. And, so if anybody's listening and would like to help me, feel free. We'd love to work with somebody on this. And, obviously Andy and I aren't the experts, but there's only so many hours in a day.
We'll do everything we can to help people get the word out and make it free. And, we'll make it a value add to the community.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, you know what? The guys over in Europe that are running the WVD channel, they had this exact same topic on a podcast I was listening to the other day, where they talked about an hour, 3 1-hour sessions to learn PowerShell for Azure WVD.
Yeah, I heard that too. So maybe they'll make us a guest one day on their show, and we'll do that same for them. So
yeah, we need to figure out how far they made it with that. Okay, what else?
So the advisor, the Azure Advisor is a great tool just in general for Azure, but they finally, again, you can see a theme here. They're plugging these key things that are part of Azure Resource Manager into WVD. So, having this advisor just gives you insight into where you can potentially optimize, cost savings, what you're going to potentially spend as an example. So the Azure Advisor is now twined into the WVD story and fully works with Windows Virtual Desktop. So again, just shows that Microsoft is committed to continuing to make WVD a first-class citizen within the Azure Resource Manager. So just, again, simple tweak, but very powerful.
Right. Okay.
And,
yeah. Keep going.
Yeah. And then, if we keep going up the list, you can see a theme here. They're fixing the Teams. So they found an issue with Teams, the Teams desktop client, and it only showed UTC time zone. Actually, one of my customers ran into this issue. So I find it, ironic that we saw this issue and now they fixed it. So, but now it's going to show the remote sessions time zone instead. So that's what's going to be. So that was a big fix. Just on the Teams. It seems petty, but hey, time is important to people, right? So if you're logging into a session, and it's got to make sure it sees the right time in the time zone so that the meetings show up properly. So this was a big issue, I know, for one of my customers that was testing it.
This reminds me back to to think about the days back to when Citrix XenDesktop first came out, and they would have a release that was all about new features, and then a release that was all about fixes, and then back and forth. I guess the idea of doing that is too slow, and we can't wait for that. So now we've got features and fixes all the time. And I guess because it's, as a service, there's no such thing as a long-term service release. It's always going to be the latest release, and that's just the world we live in, right? Yeah.
And that's the great thing about cloud too, is that you can constantly, update. I know a lot of the cloud providers do, the canary model where, they do a process where if anything goes wrong, they can always revert back. And so that's what makes cloud truly agile, right? Is that you can put a fix out there, and if it breaks, you can always roll back pretty quickly.
Does WVD have the concept where they're rolling forward a subset of clients at a time and not everybody, so they can potentially find issues quicker and not impact?
Yeah. So they have an insider program for the client, and then you can get on, if you can get into it, there's an insider program for WVD as well. And I've been trying to get on it, but we'll see. It got filled up pretty quickly, but no, the client, I am on the client side, so I get an early beta client every now and again, which is kind of cool. So you see some of the new stuff that pops up, and you can go and check out their roadmap as well and see what's coming. But I gotta say, in general, Microsoft is pretty good about being open, to use your term earlier, is they're being very forthcoming to what they're going to try to do to improve WVD. So,
well, we live in a world these days where you can't hide stuff. Somebody's going to find out. You might as well be open about it.
Yeah.
And they're going to find out, and they're going to tweet it and Instagram it and Snapchat it and everything else. So you might as well just tell them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the next item here is the remote desktop client. Again, that's the that's the big thing that people have to get their head around. Is yes, you need the remote desktop client to connect to WVD, but the good news is it auto updates, it's auto maintained once you do install it, and it is available on iOS, Android, Mac OS, and they're going to continuously update this. Now, one of the big improvements they made is they did a Win 10 Microsoft Store remote desktop client. And, it's a little different than what's on your client today if you have it, but there's just some design. I think they're using that as kind of a test to see if people like the new look and feel, a little bit more user experience. I personally like the old one a little better, but we'll see. Maybe the new one will grow on me, and I do demo it when I do my workshop every month. So.
Well, you mentioned it. Let's use the opportunity. If you go to XenTegra.com, look for events, you'll find multiple WVD workshops every month. Not only the podcast, but we're going to continue to do those workshops. And if people are looking for some hands-on or some first person or second person education on WVD, it's a great place to get that.
Yeah, and what's cool about it is not every session is the same. So I always try to make sure I'm showing the latest and greatest and ebb and flow with what's coming. And if I can, I pull on guests, from the black belt team to see if they can add insights. So I'm always trying to keep it fresh. And, I do get people who attend, maybe once a quarter because they know it's going to be different. And that's what's cool about doing it.
Pete, you can see what's on my screen. The people listening can't, obviously, but I'm going to go out to the Chrome web store because I'm using Chrome, like Chromebook, to do all the stuff I do these days. And I'm going to hit enter, searching for WVD, and I get no results. And that's kind of expected, right? And you kind of laugh about it. Okay, of course you wouldn't. But you know what? In today's world, the way Microsoft and other companies like Google and Linux-related solutions are, working together, it wouldn't be extremely crazy to have gotten a result there. And I expect someday we will, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
All right. So
the final update, and again, this is an area that I personally get impressed with Microsoft and how fast they're moving as they continue to expand their reach, as for lack of a better term, and they're going to continue to focus on reducing latency and round trip time for end users, right? So they're going to continue to put WVD in the various data centers across the world. They've added the UK, France, Norway, and South Korea just in this last month, and it will continue to grow. And what this does is helps, to use your term, you always use the analogy to get the packages closer to your kids during Christmas. So if you travel to your grandparents or your parents' house for Christmas and you got to bring your presents, because if they're not close to the kids are going to be unhappy. So
this might be the first year ever that you get presents from somebody and you open them virtually. I mean, I've done that. Actually, I've done that for years. I did it with Skype with some of my relatives. There'll be a lot of that happening this year.
Yeah. But I always use that analogy. The data needs to be as close to the end user as possible. And the data needs to be as close to the WVD session as possible. And so, Microsoft is consistently building out their data centers with WVD. So I think we're going to continue to see the footprint grow. But even from this time last year, it's amazing to see the growth. I mean, last year, and again, I'm swagging here, there's probably 6 data centers worldwide that WVD was available in. Now it's available pretty much across the world in multiple data centers, multiple regions, sometimes both. For example, in the US, it's pretty much available in every region. Right. So, Microsoft continues to grow and get that latency and get that experience better for the end user.
Well, and going back to the example of the Christmas presents and the kids, or the presents and the kids, yes, it'll work. Like, you can open your presents remotely and there is an experience there, but getting it right with them is the only time you're going to get that, magical moment. And that's what Microsoft's doing, is making this stuff available more, more localized and regional for the first country, the first tier countries and beyond.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
All right, well, that wraps up a little bit of June, a good bit of July, and a whole lot of August. We'll be back, a month from now, or probably won't even be a month from now because we're in mid-September now.
Yeah.
Talk about September results.
As soon as they post September, we'll do a talk down on that. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. To your point, Microsoft does try to stick to 2 majors a year. So I think we'll see another update, hopefully by end of year, that's fairly significant. But we'll continue to see bug fixes and expansion and et cetera in between then. But I'm very excited to see what's to come in the coming, I'll say 6 months, see what improvements they're going to make. So
So I'm gonna put on my community guy hat here for a minute and pitch a little bit about XenTegra and what we do. Not because I'm trying to sell anybody anything, but the idea that Microsoft Ignite next year when it's back in person. Ignite, right? That's the customer facing one. VMworld, which is coming up in a couple weeks. Citrix Synergy. All things that relate to this end user community space. If you don't go to those things. Somehow, look us up somehow. Go to XenTegra, find me on LinkedIn, Andy Whiteside. Let's figure out a way to get vendors and other people to help you offset the cost of that. That's the one thing that I want to do in the community beyond what we're doing here, is make sure people who want to go to these conferences find ways through other means to help offset the cost of that. And then, once we get to these conferences, ideally, if you can go to all of them, you'll be part of a good time, and we'll make sure you learn a lot.
Yeah, no, it's great. And one of the things we are doing as part of that is we're going to be giving away a Ford Bronco next year. So definitely check out bronco.XenTegra.com if you want to know more. And we're doing a lot to hopefully enhance the community and get folks twined into WVD, but also Azure for that matter.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, if you're looking, for ways to get to these conferences, let us help. 65. Let us help you with your VMware renewals and ELAs, and let us help you with your Citrix subscriptions and renewals. We'll find ways to get money out of those to help get you to the conferences. And I joke all the time and tell people that aren't in IT that getting an IT person to a big conference like one of those I mentioned is like giving them a Super Bowl ticket. And for some people, it's probably better than the Super Bowl ticket. I love it. It's my biggest, not my biggest regret for this year, but from a work perspective, my biggest regret for the year is not being able to go to the conferences. They're a big staple of every year for me. And I look forward starting in January to getting 5 or 6 of those in.
Yeah, me too.
I think this year we got 2 in, right? We got Summit, Citrix Summit, and we got iGel in, and then
that was it. Cool. Well, hey, Andy,
my lack of sleep isn't good for those, but other than that, everything's good. Love it.
Yeah. No, I agree.
All right, Pete. We'll look to do this again in a couple weeks, and we'll knock out September, and hopefully people get a lot of value out of what we cover here.
Yeah, exactly, Andy. And thanks for having me on, and I look forward to the next session.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another edition of WVD Monthly, presented by XenTegra, with your host, Andy Whiteside and Pete Downing. Thanks to podcast episode guests. Podcast produced by Pete Downing. If you are interested in joining a XenTegra podcast, email info@XenTegra.com. Podcast copyrighted by XenTegra, LLC.